Hello, everyone. Welcome to our new patent analytics webinar that is co-organized by IAM, Lexology, and LexisNexis IP. The topic today is augmented reality through the lens of the IP landscape, and it will be presented mainly by Mike Adol from Lumus and a little bit by myself, Annie Turnier from LexisNexis IP. First, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. Mike. So just a few words before we start. This webinar is being recorded, so just in case you have to leave before the end, don't worry, you will receive a link to access to it. We will send you a follow-up email in a couple of hours, and you will be able to listen to the recording. If you have questions during the presentation, please send us the question through the question tab that is here on the right side. You cannot download the slides, not as it's written, but we will send you those slides through another follow-up email. And please, if you can, that would be really nice of you if you could stay a little bit longer at the end of the webinar to answer 4 short survey questions. Thanks in advance for that. So, as I said, my name is Anne, and I work for LexisNexis IP. I'm a business development manager, and I'm in charge of France, Switzerland, and Israel. And Israel is actually the country where I had the opportunity, I should say even the chance, to meet with Mike, who is a huge fan of patent analytics. So just a few words about Mike. Mike has worked for many years in the IT industry, including 15 years for KLA. I think that he has even written some patent himself. And since 2017, he manages the IP department of Lumus. So just in case some of you don't know yet what Lumus is, it's one of the most promising companies in the field of augmented reality optics, and those technologies are already used by spinal surgeons or US fighter pilots. So really a company that you have to follow. You also have to follow Mike on his LinkedIn post. I strongly recommend his articles about IP analytics, but there is also another thing that I like very much and that I enjoy is to read what type of insight, what kind of insights he has about sustainability and sustainable development goals. I think that this is it for the presentation of Mike. I will leave the floor to you to introduce the agenda.
All right, thank you very, very much, Anne, for that wonderful introduction. I always forget to show the acknowledgements at the end, so that I'm going to show them at the beginning. And I sincerely thank Dr. Shabani Chattopadhyay of PatentSite. She's been giving me excellent application support, and without her, I couldn't have made this presentation. And more recently, I've had some really interesting chats with Mike Pellegrino of IP Analytics. So I'd like to acknowledge those two. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the agenda. I've got a lot of stuff to cover, so I'm going to move pretty quick. I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of a narrative in patent analytics. Then I'm going to show you a graphical representation of where we are in the metaverse. The gist of the presentation is going to be comparing 2 patent landscapes, that of augmented reality and augmented reality optics. Then I'm going to jump into the patent landscape analysis, and finally I'm going to summarize. So let's get right into it. So the narrative. I have a strong belief that even though patent analytics is about data, you've got to be able to tell a story. And the idea is to tell a story in the briefest, simplest way possible. And I love this little example. I don't know if anybody who's online is familiar with this but this is claimed to have been written. This 6-word story was claimed to be written by Ernest Hemingway, and it's sort of a compelling little story in so few words, and that's really the objective, to get a message across with as little as possible, but a compelling message. Graphical methods are always a great way to get messages across. So where are we in the metaverse? So this little graph, this is something called the Gartner Hype Cycle. And this was recently presented, actually at the World Economic Forum. I think this was presented by Bitcraft Ventures. And anybody's familiar with this hype cycle, it asserts that technology introduction, particularly consumer technology, goes through this very curious expectation versus time behavior, where in the early phases, there's an inflated set of expectations. Then you go into this thing called the trough of disillusionment, and then you slowly climb up the slope of enlightenment, and eventually you get to the plateau of productivity. So what they said a few months ago is where augmented reality is today, or actually the broader definition of extended reality, which AR is just one component, is here just climbing out of the bottom of the trough. And I would say even since this was presented several months ago, we've already climbed further out of that trough. And we're really beginning to feel that there's traction happening in this. And when I say traction, as opposed to the use cases which Anne correctly alluded to, which were enterprise or even military use cases, the real interesting use cases and the real interesting business opportunities today, of course, are in consumer. And that's, of course, where Loomis is almost entirely focused today. So as I said, what we're going to do in this presentation is we're going to compare two landscapes. It's really going to be a tale of two landscapes. So the one landscape is going to be augmented reality, and the second is going to be augmented reality optics. So this is me doing a very poor imitation of Freddie Mercury, and you know, fortunately in the era of augmented reality, I can just create a virtual Freddie Mercury and just impose him on the picture to block myself out. And this is the very essence of augmented reality. It's being able to augment what we see. So we're looking at the real world, but we're augmenting the real world with new information or new images. Now, all this, in order to be enabled in the most compelling use cases, requires optics. And that we call the augmented reality optics. Now, augmented reality is not only about augmenting what we see in vision, but today I'm going to talk primarily about visually augmenting reality. And that's really the crux of what's driving augmented reality today. And what you see on the right is an example of a Loomis augmented reality optics glasses, a pair of glasses comprising two components. The piece that goes right in front of your eye that we call a light guide optical element, and a display, a micro display pod, which is in the temple of the glasses. So let me just give you a couple examples, one of AR, and then I'll give you an example of AR optics. So this is a patent written by Johnson & Johnson, and I'll come back to them a bit later in the presentation. And it's about displaying how to take or insert a staple into a patient by projecting into the eyes of the surgeon the prior linear staple line. And this has been has got very, very substantial citations, and we'll talk a lot about that later. So that's just an example of an AR patent. Of course, you know, the applications in biomedical are really getting a lot of attention in the AR world lately. And you know, this is an article recently came out, how augmented reality is giving surgeons what we call superhuman abilities and considering it the future of medicine. So that's a bit hype, but it's very interesting. We've got some customers in that space, and they're doing very remarkable things. On the other side, we're going to talk about the optics side, and these patents may in some cases seem a little bit more arcane to people who are not in the know in the optics space. So this is, this is another AR example, a more arcane one, a more technological one. This one is about a method of enhancing the resolution of an image based on where the user is looking in the field of view. And this is a critical enabler. This was a patent assigned to Meta, and this is a critical enabler for augmented reality, because one of the key challenges is everything has to sit on your head, right? It's basically all sitting in a pair of glasses. So the computational capabilities typically sitting up here, and all of the projection, the data projection, and high resolution images consume more energy than low resolution images. So you really only want to present the high resolution data where you really need it. So this is a patent to Meta about adapting the resolution according to the user's gaze. And of course, Meta are talking an awful lot about augmented reality lately, as the case here with this Mark Zuckerberg interview. Let's now give a couple of examples of AR optics patents. So on the left, Magic Leap. If you're not inside the AR space, you may or may not have heard of Magic Leap, but believe me, they're a major player, as you're going to see in today's presentation. And this is essentially a patent about the architecture of their optical device, the thing that sits in front of your eye, and expands that image in 2 dimensions. They use something called diffractive technology. I'm not going to elaborate on that, but it is in contrast to the technology used by Loomis here. This is an example of an image of Magic Leap's more recent release. And one interesting observation about their AR headset is it's rather dark. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, there's quite a lot of stuff inside that optical device. It's not just the projector. There's a few other things going on in there. But secondly, diffractive waveguides, the technology used by Meta and by quite a few other companies in the space, do have some limitations in terms of brightness, in terms of how much light they can actually pump into your eye. And if you don't darken the background, then it won't always be bright enough for the observer to view it. Here's another example of an AR optics patent. This one's assigned to the company I work for, Loomis. And again, this is about 2D expansion, but this is using something called reflective waveguides. And even though the architecture is the same, we expand in 2 dimensions, but here we use these so-called reflective facets. I'm not going to elaborate on that too much, but here's a picture of a Loomis headset using reflective facets. And here you can see that the glasses are pretty much transparent, right? And in fact, it also doesn't project anything forward. And these are really critical advantages to the reflective waveguide technology that Loomis is using today. Just sort of to give you a sense of the scale of Loomis on the right, our funding is probably a little bit higher than that, but it's still below $100 million. If you look on the left, Magic Leap, according to Crunchbase at least, they've had $3.5 billion of investment. So they are a major player, and they are completely dedicated to AR. But really, they go the whole gambit. As opposed to us, we're a pure optics play. We make the optics. So wait, why have I stuck this in here? Okay, we've got a picture of the New York Times. Yeah, this is here because this is just a little recommendation. If you ever get a chance to test a pair of AR glasses, right, this is what you want to ask to see. Usually what they'll show you is some kind of animated movie or something, and it's really, really entertaining, and it can really blow you away because you've got some animated character like the one I showed with Freddie Mercury and he's dancing or something. But what you really want to see, if you want to really evaluate the quality of the AR optics device, is something like this. Basic black on white with high small font text. This is the challenge. This is what separates, you know, sort of an ordinary display from an outstanding display. First of all, that the screen is actually white and not a rainbow color, and secondly, that you can actually resolve the small text. So that's just a little piece of advice for the opportunity, which I'm sure you're going to be getting in the near future, to put on a pair of AR glasses and see what it looks like. All right, let's jump forward. Okay, so let's get into the real nitty gritty. Let's start doing some pattern landscape analysis. I'm not going to drill down on this, but I got a lot of assistance from Shalbani, who I mentioned in the acknowledgements, to develop these search criteria. And they're a little bit esoteric, but you'll see some indications later that we probably aren't too far off with these search criteria. There's some ways that you can actually evaluate how good they are. So this is really the first message slide about the comparison between the AR optics portfolio and the AR portfolio. So we've done these two searches. One is supposed to encompass all of the augmented reality patents, both pending and issued, and for that matter, also the things that have lapsed into the public domain or have been let lapse by the assignees. On the left-hand side, we're looking at or let's start on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, we're looking at portfolio size. In other words, we count the number of family members that are in AR optics. Now, they're actually a subset of the larger family in AR. And what we see, if we just do the count based on portfolio size, we see it's roughly 10% of all patent families in augmented reality are in the domain of augmented reality optics. If you turn your attention to the left-hand side of the screen, the Patent Asset Index, this is a sort of a proprietary method of evaluating the quality of a portfolio developed by LexisNexis, or actually perhaps better to say acquired by LexisNexis from the original developers. It uses a number of elements to basically evaluate the geographic coverage together with the strength of the patent family based on citations, and together with simply the number. And what you can see is when we evaluate the contribution of AR optics using the Patent Asset Index, we see it takes a substantially larger slice of the pie. The implication here is that within the larger context of AR optics is in the, at least in the intellectual property space, a substantial holder of value. So we're going to keep drilling down on this issue. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the time evolution of these two landscapes. And I'm going to keep presenting them to you side by side. Actually, the next slide will not be side by side. The next slide actually is just the augmented reality patent landscape. And what you see here is you can make some interesting observations. What you're looking at is the number of patent families filed in any given filing year, broken down into the in-force patents, the pending patents, and inactive patents. And I just want to draw two things to your attention in this graph. First of all, I assert that this graph, even though it's gone through a very steep growth phase through 2015, 16, 17, even 18, the curve is now just starting to roll off. Now, it's always tricky to validate that with patent data because you've got this uncertainty associated with unpublished patent applications. Typically, you've got the 18-month non-publication period. And of course, in the USPTO, you've also got the additional case that there's a small or a moderate subset of patent families which have been requested to remain unpublished until issue. So that's what causes that steep drop off on the right-hand side, which is artificial. We actually know that or we anticipate that the level of patent filing has not dropped off like that. The other thing you can see is there's a surprisingly large amount of abandonment, even just within 3 or 4 years of filing. Now, if I show you the equivalent slide for AR optics, the first observation is that you can't really see a clear roll-off in the AR optics landscape, right? It's never unequivocal because of this issue with the non-publication. But nonetheless, it does appear to be continuing to climb quite steeply. The other thing you can see is there's much less abandonment. And then in the next slide, I'm going to show you this in a slightly more quantitative way. And just one more little thing to sort of attract your attention. Look at this. There's actually quite a few patents that were filed in 2022 and are already in force. And in fact, this was even true back in May. And this is quite remarkable because most of these patents are actually in the Chinese Patent Office. And there is a huge amount of activity in augmented reality in China. And the Chinese Patent Office has got a very special path open only for Chinese companies, which allows them to have extremely accelerated prosecution. And these patents were filed in early 2022 and actually were allowed already in May, which is quite remarkable. Not a lot of other jurisdictions in the world have patent offices doing work that fast, for better or for worse. So just sort of now we're looking at the same data, but we're looking at it at a percentage level. And I'm just going to sort of focus your attention for a moment at 2018. And what you can see is that you've got roughly double the abandonment rate in augmented reality versus what you have in augmented reality optics. And secondly, you can see that the allowance rates are also substantially lower. So there seems to be quite a difference in these two portfolios, in these two landscapes. So a great way to sort of drill down on this question and sort of understand a little bit more about what's going on is to use a methodology developed by IP Analytics, where you can actually see what's called an assignee dashboard. And what you've got here is the USPTO rejection analysis. On the left, you've got it for augmented reality, and on the right, you've got it for AR optics. And you see quite a substantial difference between these two when you look at sort of the status of the various rejections. First of all, you can see that just in general, non-final rejections or rejections in general are lower on the AR optics side. You know, you've got better performance in terms of occurrences per application. But one particularly interesting data set here, I think, is the 112. Well, first of all, the total rejections, that's the third line down, right? Where there's a very big difference. But what we can see is in 101 rejections, which are sort of the subject matter rejections in the USPTO, there's a huge difference, right? You've actually got quite a high proportion of subject matter rejections in AR and a very low proportion in AR optics. And when you think about it, perhaps that's not entirely unexpected, because AR comprises many use cases that are described sometimes in rather vague terms about how to use data in an augmented image and create all kinds of use cases. And sometimes, or quite frequently, the examiners believe that these things actually aren't patentable subject matter. No such problem faces AR optics. You know, AR optics mostly focus on apparatus type claims or system claims, and you know, subject matter rejections are much less likely to occur. But just in general, you get a sense that there's more white space in AR optics than in AR, which is a little bit counterintuitive. You might have thought that a subject like AR would have an enormous amount of white space, but it turns out that there's still a lot going on in the optics space. And I'm going to sort of allude to that more in the next few slides. Now, here's something else you can do with patent data. So what I've done here is, rather than show you the filing rates one versus the other, I've actually just calculated the proportion of AR optics patent families filed versus from within the AR portfolio. And you see an interesting sort of dynamic here. In the 90s through to about 2000, you can see that this number fluctuates a lot. That's simply because the numbers were quite low. And in fact, the players during this period, they were primarily in the military electro-optic space. And this is really where sort of the core technology of augmented reality began. The first users of AR headsets were actually pilots, and in particular fighter pilots. And there are a number of product offerings in this space for fighter pilots. It started off basically just a slab of glass put in front of the pilot, and then later it went to these headset structures that you can see. Actually, the Thales case, that's one that uses a Loomis head-up display, a Loomis waveguide and projector. But as we came out of sort of the noughties and we moved into 2010, etc. So a number of companies emerged who were really focused on the optics. Basically, from 2000 and onwards, with the exception of Loomis, you started getting companies that just made augmented reality optics. Loomis, DigiLens, Dispelix, Wave Optics. I'll come back to, you'll see DigiLens and of course Loomis again later in this presentation. But the real action, the really interesting action in space began when some of the major multinationals started to get involved. And we cannot not mention Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, Magic Leap, which I mentioned earlier on, Google with Google Glasses, which came out in 2015, and more recently, a lot of a frenzy of activity in this space by Meta. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Ray-Ban Stories product that's recently been released. They don't yet have AR optics in them, but they are beginning to move into the AR space. They're starting off at least on the side of installing cameras in their devices and using sound inside the glasses. But we probably won't be surprised if they start to put AR optics inside their devices in the near future, as we anticipate is going to happen with a number of other these major Silicon Valley players. So now let's get a more visual way to look at the players in this space. So this is an AR. This is now going back to look specifically at augmented reality, and this is a bubble chart. And the way these bubble charts work, they're produced in PatentSite. On the y-axis is the technology relevance, which focuses primarily on the amount of citations of the members of the patent family of these various assignees. And then on the x-axis on the bottom, you've got the market coverage. So how extensively they're filing in terms of jurisdictions. And you kind of see that there's this big clump in the middle where you've got sort of most of the really major players. You can see Apple, Microsoft, Samsung, Alphabet, but of course being Google, and then Meta, that big green circle. And their technology relevance is sort of at the moderate level. What's interesting, of course, are these outliers. Johnson & Johnson, which we cannot ignore, they've had incredible success in, at least from an IP perspective, in getting priority on some really key use cases for augmented reality optics in methods of surgery. But if you just come down below them, what you can see there are Magic Leap, who have a very, very substantial size portfolio. By the way, the size of the circle is actually the portfolio size. And then to their right, you can see Loomis. And these guys are sort of standing out in terms of technology relevance versus the rest of the players. But this is in the AR space in general. What we're going to do now is we're going to just see how much of these companies' portfolios are actually captured by our search criteria. So for example, the AR search criteria captured about 82% of Loomis's portfolio, about 75% of Magic Leap's portfolio. So it seems like we're sort of doing okay. We perhaps could have expanded the search criteria even more and captured more, but then you're at the risk of sort of what you call a type 2 error, where you start bringing in stuff which really isn't relevant. So there's always a compromise here, and probably what is interesting is to see Snap and Meta. Or Meta perhaps is more familiar. Everybody knows Facebook, and to think that nowadays, 15.7% of their total filings are now in augmented reality really shows that they're taking this very seriously. And if you compare their with Microsoft, Alphabet, or Sony, Epson, or Apple that come below them, you can really see that Meta are a very, very serious player, or intend to become a very serious player in augmented reality, in line with some of the things that we hear their CEO saying online. Now let's sort of look at the AR optics. So this is the sort of the more esoteric stuff. This is the more behind the scenes technology companies. Now you will see the big players in here. You can see Meta, Samsung, and who else? Exxon, Zeiss. But what the players that also are in here, and by the way, this is scaled the same as the previous chart. These are really optics play companies, right? So we're an optics play company. DigiLens is an optics play company. Dispelix is an optics play company, and so they've made their way into the top 20. But of course, as you can see, the three top performers here in terms of technology relevance are DigiLens, Loomis, and Magic Leap. Microsoft are nonetheless at least in patent asset index in second place based on the size of their portfolio. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So here again, just to sort of get a sense of how we captured the AR optics landscape. So you can see that companies like Dispelix, Wave Optics, and perhaps a little less Loomis, where we are getting most of their portfolios. So I know for a fact that these are the real AR optics players. Also true of Letinar and Vuzix, slightly less so. They do have a slightly broader product offering. And then you can see DigiLens and Magic. So now we're going to try and rank these guys. And the way we're going to try and rank these guys is using, again, the patent asset index that I mentioned earlier. And so this is what's called a rank Pareto. So that's a picture of Pareto on the top right, an Italian gentleman. He was an engineer and then a sort of a statistician, became famous for the Pareto principle at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century. And essentially, a rank Pareto is what you see here. You count something. In this case, we're counting the patent asset index of all the patents in the AR space in pink and in AR optics in purple. And then you rank them from the highest to the lowest. And you always get a curve of the same shape. It always looks like a ski slope. And they always decay rapidly as you go from left to right, surprisingly rapidly, right? And this sort of goes back to this Pareto principle that says, or one of the sort of more well-known and not necessarily accurate, but sort of popular statements is that 80% of the assets are held by 20% of the companies, or 80% of the value you can get by 20% of the effort, et cetera, et cetera. So and this really boils down to, it's basically characterizing this distribution. A very curious characteristic of this distribution, and now I'm getting a little bit mathematical here, so I have to apologize, but just bear with me. You might appreciate this just when you look at the graph. If you take the very same data, and rather than plot it on a linear plot, right, where the asset index is linear and the rank is linear, if you put it on a log plot, so I hope you're familiar with what a log plot is, you can see that each decade shrinks by a factor of 10. So you get this remarkable straight line. And you know, data analysts love straight lines because you can extract data with high fidelity out of a straight line. You can extract the slope and you can extract the intercept. And here we're looking at this beautiful straight line fit to that Pareto chart that I showed in the previous slide. And you know, again, I'm not going to stay with this too long, but this is the basic mathematics, right, of such a chart. And when you put it on a log-log plot, you can actually, in a relatively trivial way, extract the slope of that chart. And it turns out that the slope of that chart is, in fact, the this S, the exponent in the chart that I showed in the previous slide. And I'm going to assert that that can be considered a metric of consolidation. Now, I understand at this point you're thinking, what is he talking about? But bear with me and see if I can get my point across. So, in fact, I'm going to say it's a landscape consolidation index. It's an index which demonstrates what level of consolidation you have inside a given landscape. Now, here I've plotted the same data from from the AR optics case, and I have to point out at this point that when you look at us in AR optics, even though we're in 12th position in AR, we're in 3rd position behind only Microsoft and Magic Leap in AR optics. It's quite possible that our position there may be brief, because the filing rate that Meta is filing, I would not be surprised if they will overtake us in the fairly near future. But just getting back to this consolidation index, okay? What I've done here is I've done a time evolution of this consolidation index. So I've put this consolidation index now on the vertical axis. You can see it there, and the number itself is not that critical. And the horizontal axis, that's the intercept with the y-axis on that previous graph, right? So the intercept over there on the y-axis. And what you can see are two things. First of all, you can see that generally speaking, as time moves by, the dots move from left to right, which is not surprising, right? We would anticipate that the portfolio sizes, and in particular, it's the expectation value of the portfolio size of the top ranked player, is going to grow, right? Because these are very, very active portfolios where there's a lot of filing going on. But the thing I really want to draw to your attention is that the AR optics landscape is actually the consolidation index is actually shrinking over time. It's going down. Whereas that was the case up until about 2016 with augmented reality. But around 2016, 2017, something changed, and the portfolio or the landscape, the augmented reality landscape, started to consolidate. Now, what does that mean, consolidate? Consolidate means that more and more of the value is in the hands of fewer and fewer players. And this is an important insight into what's happening inside a technology landscape, right? During the early phases of development, what will typically happen is you get a gold rush. You get many new players running into the domain, right? And as that happens, the consolidation index shrinks, right? The market fragments, many players come in, and the growth is generated by new players. But once the big players start to assert their dominance on the field, so the consolidation starts to turn, as it's done already in augmented reality, but has not yet happened in AR optics. So we'll come back to this point perhaps in summary. So now just a little bit more data. If you haven't done a bad enough data dump on you already, I'm going to do a little bit more and throw some jurisdiction data on you. So what these are pretty cool little diagrams that you can also produce in patent site. And here, what you've got on the vertical axis is the competitive impact. And what we're looking at here is these subsets, these sub-portfolios based on the origin of the inventor, presumably meaning where this stuff was invented, right? And you can see here the top players ranked by patent asset index, and you can see, surprise, surprise, USA at the top. Perhaps you are surprised to see that China is in second place, and you can also see that China's portfolio is already larger than the US portfolio. Right? They are outfiling the world in augmented reality, as is the case in many other spaces. Interestingly, their competitive impact is relatively low. Some of that is as a result of the fact that they file in much narrower jurisdictions. Many Chinese patents are in fact only filed in China, which is an interesting dynamic I'm sure many of you are aware of. And of course, I have to draw your attention to Israel. And you can see that it sort of seems to have, although its portfolio size is modest, it does seem to be doing well in competitive impact. But if we now go over to the optics side, right, it becomes even clearer, right? First of all, you can see again the same phenomena where you see that China is outfiling everybody else. But here you really see the dominance in terms of competitive impact of the Israeli filings, and maybe just something that people are less aware of, and that is that AR has been under development in Israel for decades because a number of companies have been developing technology for head-up displays for fighter pilots. And as you know, Israel has a very active defense technology sector. It's a sort of a fact of life of being in the Middle East. And you can really see this come to play. And many of these early phase patents that come into play actually were initially filed by companies in that sector. And that's one of the reasons why we have a very strong optics specialization, of course, not just in AR, but in particular in AR. Okay, how long have we got to go? We got just under 15 minutes. So I'll quickly wrap up and I'll be able to hand it back to Anne so we can have some question time. So key takeaways. So as I said, I think that all patent analytics should do their best to tell a story. I don't know how successful I've been at that, but that's certainly been my mission. Augmented reality is crawling out of the trough of disillusionment. And I don't know if I've convinced you by looking at the patent data, but I can certainly attest to that in terms of the frenzy of activity that we see in the market and the interest for augmented optics or AR optics in general, and for our products in particular. What I think I managed to show you that AR optics filings are growing faster than augmented reality, substantially faster. As you know, driven by the entry of many new players, right? Every Tuesday and Thursday we see a new entrant in AR optics from various countries, many in China, but not only in Korea, even in Israel, obviously many in the United States, and also in Europe, in Germany. So there are many new players coming in AR optics. And then something more sort of strategic about these two landscapes. The AR portfolio, the AR landscape is consolidating, but AR optics continues to fragment. And I hope I've convinced you by those bubble charts that Loomis is punching above their weight. We're a small company. We're probably the smallest in the top 10 by far, and yet we are doing very well in the patent analytics position. And finally, and this is perhaps not necessarily categorically supported by the data, but I can tell you that this is the insight that we know by being in this space, is that AR optics has become the rate limiting enabler for consumer AR products. Until AR optics can be a pair of glasses that look pretty much like this, with all the capabilities that we anticipate that consumers want, they are not going to move to consumer products. And this is closer today than ever. That I can certainly tell you. Okay, so over to you, Anne.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Yeah, I got a couple of questions for you, Mike.
Sure.
So first one is, in which AR sectors, technologies are Chinese manufacturers strong, and what should we expect from them in the near future?
So as I mentioned, they're very, very active in the optics space, but they're also companies that are developing like what you would call the back end, right? There's a lot of very sophisticated analysis that has to be done, and there are companies doing work there. And of course, there are also companies that actually want to become AR players and are developing use cases or attempting to develop use cases. One of the, what we know is that whether you can sort of consider this an attractive proposition or not, but the Chinese police are actually very, very heavily invested in the application of augmented reality in order to be able to identify people's personal information as they look at them in real time and look at their faces. So their police force will be able to have a pair of AR glasses and look at a crowd and literally identify people in the crowd in real time. So, you know, these are the kind of use cases that we know are being developed in China. Any other questions, Anne?
Yes. How do you go about finding accurate search queries for AR in relation to AR optics to isolate and show only one of the technologies in the searches, while not excluding unknown actors because of a search query being too suited to show large part of selected portfolio?
Okay, so just a sec, I'm going to have to try and pop that question out. I can't see it, so maybe you could just
maybe we go. We have other ones.
One more time.
Oh, how do you? We have plenty of others, so maybe we can keep this one and.
So maybe I'll just briefly say that the search criteria, they began by basically looking at where augmented reality appears in IPC codes and then selecting those IPC codes. And then also going to some other slightly broader areas and then limiting those broader areas using some text searches, either title abstract or claims. So go ahead,
Anne. Do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic has played a role in slowing down AR optics consolidation?
Yeah, well, consolidation, perhaps maybe where we can't really see it yet, but there's no doubt that the COVID epidemic significantly drove virtualization, right? And AR is I think was a benefactor of that, and it potentially did drive companies to invest even more heavily in augmented reality. And in AR optics, you know, it's still early days to say if these new companies that are popping up are doing so as a result of their understanding of the significance of AR due to the COVID epidemic, or if my anticipation is that we haven't really in the patent data, we haven't really seen that impact yet because of the 18-month non-publication.
Then we have also a question from Latin America. What can we do in the market of optical products with rare materials in Latin America?
With rare materials in Latin America. So what can we do with, one more time.
What can we do in the market of optical products with rare materials in Latin America?
Well, maybe I can say one thing, and I don't know for sure, but AR optics requires some very, very interesting and in some cases rare materials in the coding structures in order to enable the sophisticated light control that's needed. So without knowing, it's conceivable that some of those materials are actually sourced in South America, but that's a pure speculation.
Yeah, and it's a little bit not related to patents, so maybe it's a little bit more difficult to answer that question. Yeah. Then we have also questions about patent quality. Of course, when patent quality was shown, did it refer just to jurisdictions or also to description, claim, patent document quality?
And so perhaps the simplest way to answer that question is to describe in slightly more detail the main qualitative index we're using, which is the patent asset index. Qualitative meaning an indication of quality. And the patent asset index comprises two components, a technology relevance component and a market coverage component. One looks at how heavily a patent is subsequently cited by filings that came later. And of course, the market coverage looks at the number of jurisdictions in which the patent was filed, normalized to the size of the economy of that jurisdiction, where I think in the patent asset index, they set the US as a value of 1. And then so you get some number. And then when you combine those two things, the technology relevance and the market coverage, then you get the patent asset index. And of course, you've got to multiply it by the number of assets that you have with each of those. So I think that's probably the most pragmatic way to answer that question.
Yeah, I have another question that is quite close to this one. Do you see any better metrics for patent quality than forward citations? Forward citations to me seem to be easy to quickly obtain, but I wonder if they really indicate the quality of claims of a patent. But I can see a better way other than reviewing claims.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I tend to agree with I think what the questioner is, the point they're making, and that is that citations are not necessarily the best metric of quality of a patent, right? First of all, there are self-citations. Second of all, there are citations of all different flavors, right? There are citations, like if you just think about it in the USPTO, you have X citations, Y citations, and you also just have general citations, either by the, in the IDS of the filer or by the examiner as a general representation of the state of the technology. And clearly an X citation or perhaps marginally more so a Y citation are a much stronger indication of the relevance or the technology relevance of a patent, because it's basically blocking somebody else's invention. And so I would say that a more nuanced metric of patent value is to look specifically at those citations, as opposed to just the general citation count. I would also assert that there are a couple of other value metrics that are worth looking at, not necessarily related to citations, but by just looking at the portfolio or at the patent, the family in particular, seeing, for example, whether or not they have pending patent applications in a jurisdiction, because it's an expensive business to keep a patent family alive by filing a continuation. And those patent families where that's been done by the assignee seems to indicate that they seem to think that it has value. So that's another way to actually slice and dice this. But there are many other ways that we can consider. So Anne, maybe if we just got a couple more minutes, if there's any more questions.
Yeah, we got a question about litigation. Are you aware of any important patent litigation in your field, in this field?
Perhaps I'd have to be a little bit hesitant here. I can state with confidence that the company I work for is not involved in any litigation at this stage. I think that the reason why you're not seeing much litigation in augmented reality is because the real big market is yet to happen. The consumer market, which by all indications is sort of going to truly kick off in about a couple of years, I would say. I think we're going to see the real sort of the big players coming in 2024, thereabouts. It's really only when those big players get out there does litigation start to become interesting. So anybody who's got something, holding on to some asset that they think will potentially read on something, is probably keeping their cards close to their chest. And so we're not seeing that much litigation in AR at the moment.
And then maybe the last question, would Michael please define what is fragmented versus consolidated?
Yes, so a fragmented landscape is a landscape where the assets in the landscape are distributed more uniformly between the asset holders, between the assignees, between the players, the competitors, right? You're basically looking at a game, right? And everybody's competing, and if it's fragmented, then everybody's in with a decent chance, right? There's no single player who's got a really, really strong hand, and nobody's got a hope against it. Whereas in a consolidated landscape, right, the top few players holding the vast majority of the assets, and so that's what we mean by consolidation. Now, the reason why that metric is important when you're trying to analyze the state of a business space is because clearly when a business space is highly consolidated, the probability, or let's say the difficulty, the barrier to penetration of a new player is much, much higher. Whereas if you're in a fragmented space, right, then the barrier to penetration is lower. And if you've got deep pockets and you're willing to invest either through acquisition or through core technology development, then you've probably got more to do in a fragmented landscape than you do in a consolidated landscape, unless you basically go in and acquire the guys at the top.
All right, well, I think this is the end of our webinar today. Thank you very much, Mike, for your availability and all the things that we have learned today, thanks to you. Someone is asking for your information, so please stay tuned. You will receive some emails and some information about Mike. And we're hoping to see you again very soon. Thank you very much for your time.
And thanks to Pat Insight for giving me the opportunity.
You're welcome, Mike. And please, thank you for replying to the questions at the end. Thank you very much to the audience. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
See you soon.